So in the previous tutorial, we added this crosshair, which actually show on the HUD whenever we equip a firearm weapon, and whenever we move back to sort of like a melee weapon, like unarmed or sword, then it won't show that crosshair anymore, right? But if I switch back to the firearm weapon like rifle or pistol or something like that, then it will show the crosshair. Also, if I started sprinting, then that crosshair vanishes on the HUD, and if I stop the sprinting, it will again visible. Right? So those are the features actually we added in the previous session. And now let's see how we can sort of make this crosshair dynamic, right? For example, like let's say if I moving, then this crosshair should like spread further, right? Or like when I'm jumping, again that crosshair should spread, and maybe like if I'm firing, also that crosshair should spread appropriately, right? Okay, so in order to make our crosshair spread, first I think we have to animate our crosshair, right? So you can go to the WB crosshair, and I'll close up all the unnecessary stuff on the tabs. So let's first focus on this one, right? So on the WB crosshair, let's animate these crosshair bars, right? Because ideally we don't need to manipulate our target dot, so it will remain as it is. But this, what do you call this, bars, the target bars should be animated properly in order to make a proper target spread or crosshair spread, right? So you can do that actually by going to the animations hierarchy here, and I will dock it to the layout like this, and by default we doesn't have any sort of animations, so we have to create it. But in order to create one, first you have to select one of these elements from the hierarchy. So I'll start animating from the top bar onwards, right? So I'll select the top image component or widget component, and then I will create a new animation called crosshair spread in. And now you can see when I'm select this specific animation sequence, it will show like at the viewport I selected this specific anime, right? So now I can animate it. So you can see now the timeline is interactable, and by default we have the timeline up until 5 seconds, but I think we don't need to go until that depth. We can simply remain in a 1 second time frame, right? So that later on actually we can control the play rates whatever the way we want. So as the identity timeline, we can have this 1 second limit, right? So since I'm going to use a 1 second duration for the timeline, first I will mark this as the keyframe, right? So I'm going to keyframe the translation node, right? Because I'm not going to manipulate these paddings or the orientations manually. Instead we can control the render transformations whatever the way we want, right? Okay, so I will keyframe the transform. Now you can see that timeline has been added to here, right? So we have all of those translation, rotation, scale and shear, but I think we don't need to consider these rotation and shear in our scenario. Like we have to focus on the translation and the scale, right? Okay, so once I keyframe that specific node, I can go back to the 0, and I will add a sort of like a translation here, right? So considering the top bar, it should go to top, right? Therefore, the translation for the y-axis should be minus 400. So you can see now it's sort of at the top, but since now it in sort of like a very distant location from the target point, I can't see it properly, right? So I will increase its scale further for the y-axis, right? Maybe like 10, right? Now you can clearly see that specific top bar, right? Then similarly, let's keyframe those translation logics as well. Now you can see there is a time frame has been added to the animation timeline, right? And now you can play from the timeline and see how it works, right? So you can see it smoothly go from top to the target dot area, okay? Even you can play and see how the animation works, right? Now one bar is done. So similarly we have to manipulate rest of the bars, right? So then I will go to the bottom and go to the end of the timeline and add a keyframe. So the the bottom hierarchy is also been appeared here, and I'll go back to the 0th position, keep selecting the bottom, and I'll add the translation column 400. You can see the bottom bar has been appeared here, and I'll scale it further on the y-axis like we did on the top bar, and I'll keyframe it as well. Okay, now you can see we have two bars and both of them has been animated properly. Even you can play and see how it works. Okay, now let's do the same thing for the right and left bars. So I'll start from the right bar and go to the end of the timeline, keyframe it, go to the beginning of the timeline, add a translation, maybe like for X. I will add the translation this time because we have to move it horizontally, and I'll add a translation for the the scale transformation for the y-axis. So it will be appear like this, and keyframe the entire thing. Okay, now finally let's go to the right bar, go to the end of the timeline, keyframe whatever the default configuration it is, go to the beginning of the timeline. Let's add a minus translation transform here, and similarly let's add a y scaling here, and finally keyframe it. Okay, now you can see we have a nice weapon crosshair animation like this, right? But if I compile and play it now, you may not be able to see that animation. Also, like by default we have this huge crosshair that is been appeared, right? Because if you check the translation now, by default we have this translation at the 0th index, right? That's the issue. So I'll get rid of from the timeline, right? You can see now in the viewport it doesn't show any blue text that I selected the specific timeline, and then I'll change this back to its default state, which is 0 by 0, 1 by 1, 0 by 0, 1 by 1, this one also 0 by 0 and 1 by 1, and finally 0 by 0 and 1 by 1. Right. Now you can see by default our crosshair should appear like this, and if I play it, yes, the default crosshair is there. Right. Now the next question is how we can play that specific animation. Right. So there are multiple different ways that we can play that animation. But I think in order to play that animation, obviously we should call a specific functionality to play this specific animation explicitly. But first it should be driven by a specific event, right? Because we don't know when to spread this specific crosshair, right? So even if you add a crosshair spread to the pre-construct or construct, it will apply only once, right? And if you add for the event tick, then it will call again and again, which is not good for the performance, right? Instead, actually, we should be able to listen for a given event, and only then we should play that specific dynamic spread. Right. So in order to do that, let's go to our weapon system, which is a subsystem, of course, and then I'll add a new event dispatcher called on spread changed, right? So whenever this event is being triggered, we should be able to manipulate our crosshair by playing that specific crosshair animation, crosshair spread animation. But also, like, I don't need to spread like entirely like you see on the HUD. I just need to spread a small amount of it, right? So in order to control that portion, I will add an input field called spread, right? This is a float value. So based on the magnitude of this spread value, we can control how much large spread that we should do to the crosshair. Right. And then we should listen to this event at our crosshair, right? We can do that. Right, so at our crosshair at the event construct, let's get rid of this function. Let's get the weapon system, right? And we don't have the owner. Yeah, the owner is obviously the player now. So let's get the player character. Player characters get weapon system. And then let's bind an event to that on spread change. So you can see we have a suggestion called bind event to on spread change. So let's use that dispatcher, and then we can create an event to listen to this specific event, and let's create a matching function, and I'll call this one as update crosshair based on the specific spread. So for now, I'll just print the spread that we return from that specific event dispatcher, so we can see like how it works. Right. So now I'm potentially listening to this specific event dispatcher. Then what should I do? Yeah, then I should call this specific event dispatcher whenever I perform a certain action, right? So for example, like I said, when I'm moving, this specific event should be called so that the dynamic crosshair spread will be applied. Or whenever I'm shooting, again, that event should be called so that specific dynamic spread will be applied again, something like that. Now the issue is actually how we can determine whether we are moving or not, right? So if you go and check out the locomotion system, we have set of functionalities to listen to those events, but we don't have the control at our weapon system, right? So what we can do, let's go to the character base, right? But here we have the reference for both weapon system and locomotion system, so that we can implement a certain event to control those behaviors for us, right? So I'll add a new event called update crosshair, right? So whenever I'm going to update the crosshair, yeah, for now I will simply check whether I'm moving or not, right? And if I'm moving, this specific event get triggered, otherwise it won't, right? So how can I determine whether I'm moving or not? Yeah, maybe at the event tick. For now I will use this event tick. Later on, let's see how we can do a further optimization. So I'll get the locomotion system, and do we have a function to determine whether we are moving or not? No. So let's create a new function for that. I'll create a new function called is moving, which is a getter. It should be a pure function, and it should return only a boolean value as a return value. And I'll get the owner reference, get its velocity, and get its vector length xy values. And if we have positive values for either of x and y, then potentially this specific character or the owner is moving, right? Okay, now let's go to the character base. At the event tick, I'll sort of add a delay, right? Maybe like 0.2 second, and let's check whether this guy is moving or not. And if it is moving only, we have to call this update crosshair. Yeah, and I think we don't need to add an event here. Instead, let's use weapon system, and the weapon system, let's add a event, right? Called maybe update crosshair, right? Then I'll go back to the character base and I'll use that specific event at here. Okay, so just to see whether this checks works properly, I'll go to the update crosshair and add a print statement and see whether it's working or not. Right, now you can see whenever I'm moving, the hello string is printed, and when I'm not moving, it not printed. Right, which means this update crosshair is working properly. Now what I have to do is basically call this on spread change, right? Like this. And for now I will add sort of like a very large spread called maybe 1, and I just want to see like whether the crosshair is being manipulated or not, right? So I'll equip a rifle and try to move. Okay, yeah, actually it's been manipulated. You can see like it prints 1, right? But it's not been applied to the crosshair yet, because at the crosshair widget we haven't implement a function to do that change, right? So if you remember the w crosshair, I created this event listener called update crosshair, but it's simply printing a string yet, right? Instead, actually we should be able to play this specific animation, crosshair spread animation, based on the spread that we have been given, right? So how we can do that? So I'll first get rid of this print statement, and I'll get this spread anim reference and call for play animation for a given time range, right? So the reason to take this time range, if you remember at the animation, here we have added the identity timeline, right? From 0 to 1 we have a dedicated spread. For example, like if I choose this entire timeline, we have like a very large spread. But for example, let's say if I go up until from 1 to 0.75, then we have a relatively very smaller spread, right? So that's the idea of having this identity timeline, so that actually we can control the given start and end location, right? So end location would be ideally like maybe like 1, but for the start location it should be something dynamic like this, right? So if we need a smaller crosshair spread, then we can maybe rely on this range, or if we need a larger crosshair spread, then we can go to this range, something like that. So that's the reason to select this specific functionality, right? And there, now we have a spread. Based on the spread, we should determine what's the start time and the end time. So maybe I'll subtract some value from this, maybe like 1000, and then can safe divide it. No, maybe let's use safe divide, right? From the 1000, and we have sort of a value. Let's promote it to a local variable called L end time, right? And then let's add a small deviation for our end time, 0.001 maybe, and let's save it as a local variable called L start time. Okay, then we can use that start time here and then time here. And the playback speed, I don't think this one would do the trick, because we are using an identity timeline, so it will take the entire 1 second to make that spread. Instead, actually, we should use a very smaller value, so that this transition will be instantaneous, right? So I'll use like 0.000001, which is a very small value, so that ideally our transition would be much more nicer. Okay, then let's go to the weapon system, and instead of spread as 1, maybe I'll give it like 100, right? And let's see how it works. If I play it now and equip a weapon, okay, you can see actually that spread has been already been applied, right? Because at the event tick, I'm keep updating that spread, and it won't go back to whatever the default state that we had. So I think calling at the event tick won't work. Instead, I will use this begin play, and I'll show you like maybe after 5 seconds, this crosshair update will be applied once we equip the weapon, right? Okay, so let's equip the rifle. Let's wait for 5 seconds. Okay, I think it's not been applied. Why was that? Yeah, I did it like we should move. That's the issue. So for now, I will just remove this reference and plug it directly, and maybe like 3 seconds would be fine. Okay, you can see like after 3 seconds that crosshair has been updated, right? And maybe like after 3 seconds, actually we can make it go for the 0 state as well, but I'm not going to update this function yet, because we should control that dynamically, right? Not as the manual manipulations. But I just want to show you like that crosshair manipulation works now, right? And maybe for example, I'll give it like 500, so you'll be able to see very large spread, something like this. And if I go to the 1000, then that's the entire spread, right? You can see that's the entire spread. But if I remain at the 0, then simply that's the default spread, which means there is no spread, right? So that's how we can control the spread. Right, for this event dispatcher, it goes to the spread. Maybe I'll add a yeah, default value is 0. Yeah, 0 would be fine. So maybe I'll give it like 200 for now, just to showcase like the default manipulation, right? So ideally when I'm moving, maybe the crosshair should be automatically go to this stage, right? So currently actually it has been hard coded, or like let's say it is manually manipulated, but later on we'll see how we can automate this, right? So I don't need to specifically determine the specific value when I'm moving to go to this state, and whenever I'm not moving, go to the default state. Instead, like it will automatically handle that for us, right? Okay, let's see how we can do that in the next video. I'll see you there.